Hello everyone, Pulse here, and welcome to yet another episode of Delving Deep ESO. Now in this episode we're going to continue our little journey to find out all there is to know about the skill lines that will be available in Elder Scrolls Online. And today we finally make it to the ever exciting guild skill lines. Now before we discuss this stuff, as always, let me remind everyone of a couple things. First, this information isn't confirmed by Zenimax in any way, really, and instead this is a collective of information that comes from numerous beta testers, and the evidence just really seems to lay out pretty straightforward. All that we've gotten here in terms of the leaks and the evidence, coupled with what we were shown at QuakeCon not so long ago, really shows us that more than likely these are the skills we will be getting. If not, this is at least the base form. We shouldn't expect any drastic changes from this, what we've been going over so far. So what we've been going over is what you should expect. Now in addition to this, we also need to keep in mind that any plain numbers that may be slipped into the discussion here, and I'll try my best to keep them out, need to be taken with a heap of salt, mainly because numbers, like a plain number like 5 for example, it may be a small number, right? But in the context of Elder Scrolls Online, we don't know how a number like 5 is going to scale, or how potent the number actually is. So maybe 5 is small to us, but in the context of Elder Scrolls Online, it could be huge. So we have to always keep that in mind. The numbers are not really relevant. Percentages, on the other hand, which I will be mentioning throughout this video, it's got a lot better sort of reasoning behind it. It lets us see what the skill is actually going to do. So if we can see the percentages, for example, if we see a skill has 75% to do such and such, or lowers or gains or what have you by this percentage, we can see fairly well what the usage of that skill is going to be. So expect percentages, expect numbers to slip in there, but pay attention to the percentages, ignore the numbers is really what I'm trying to get across here. But let's get done with the boring stuff. I know that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the skill lines that come with the guilds, and we're going to start with the Fighters Guild. Now, the Fighters Guild starts off with this ultimate ability, Dawnbreaker. This is going to do a conal effect, which is going to deal some damage to all the enemies in front of you, and then it's also going to deal about 60% additional damage to Undead and Daedra. Now, as I said throughout most of these skill line videos, the ultimate ability comes first because it really lays out the theme. And the Fighters Guild is probably the most harsh for this rule. You will see throughout there's a ton of extra little tidbits about doing extra to Undead and Daedra. That's what this guild is about in the storyline, as it were. So it fits well, I suppose, but you'll see throughout what I mean by this just overarching theme here. Now, the first active ability is called Trap Beast. This is going to place a trap at a location that takes about 5 seconds to arm. The first enemy to hit the trap takes some magic damage, but it's going to be immobilized for 6 seconds. That's really the main part of it. And then Undead and Daedra are also going to burn for some magic damage. As I said, it's going to have the extra effects on the Undead and Daedra throughout. Now, the next one is called Silver Bolts. This is going to deal a small amount of damage. Undead and Daedra are going to be knocked down for a hefty number of seconds, and then it's also going to have a small chance on hit to banish targets, dealing very high damage. That's a pretty cool extra little proc there. Some people don't like procs, as I've explained in the past, but that's a pretty cool skill actually. It seems like it fits well enough, and I'm glad they didn't relegate that extra little proc to only Undead and Daedra. It doesn't seem to be the case. Now next up we have Expert Hunter. This is going to, for about 12 seconds, deal 25% additional damage to Undead Daedra, and then you're also going to have killing an Undead or Daedra increases the duration of your Expert Hunter buff by about 15 seconds. I'm not sure how I feel like this, because this one essentially is useless outside of a situation where Undead or Daedra are involved. Now, obviously, odds are we're going to be fighting a lot of Undead and Daedra with the whole idea of the storyline in Elder Scrolls Online on its initial release. The thing I worry about is these skills they're just so niche. I don't really like them, and this one essentially has zero usage. At least the other ones have some usage outside of fighting Undead and Daedra, so I'm not really a fan of Expert Hunter, I have to say. Now finally we get to Circle of Protection, which is going to put a small radius on the ground of self-protection for about 20 seconds or so. Allies are going to take about 15% less damage when they stand in the Circle of Protection, and then take another 20% less damage from Undead and Daedra for both you and your allies. Again, this one has a pretty nice actual usage outside of fighting Undead and Daedra, but that extra, essentially it would be 35% damage reduction from Undead and Daedra for people in the Circle of Protection. That's pretty strong. That's a pretty nice ability overall, actually. Now that brings us to the passives. The first one is called Intimidating Presence, allows you to intimidate certain NPCs in conversations. Now this is only something guilds seem to be able to do. This is not something that you can earn elsewhere from what I can tell, depending on which guild you choose, and there's 2 in the launch of the game with at least, oh I take that back, there's at least 3 confirmed as of now. I forgot there's the Undaunted, I believe they're called, or something like that. But the conversation stuff seems to only be a guild skill line kind of thing. So that was pretty cool to see. It kind of changes up how you go about your story and how you can interact with the NPCs. A very nice little addition there so that it feels more immersive. Now the next one is called Bounty Hunter. This is going to cause Fighters Guild in Cyrodiil will offer you bounty quests. So this means that in the PvP zone, there's going to be bounty quests. Now, I'm not sure what they mean by this, but when they say Cyrodiil bounty quests, my mind instantly goes to it's going to target an enemy player on the opposing team, which I thought they said was not going to be in the game in any way. So I wonder if this is a hint to what they're going to do. So maybe initially this sort of passive ability is going to allow you to hunt down what the story would consider high priority targets or something like that in Cyrodiil, because there are some quests there, right? But potentially this could mean, like I said, you could be targeted towards a player that is doing well or doing something, or maybe it's just completely random. That would be pretty damn cool and be a huge draw to the Fighters Guild, in my opinion. It'd be one of the coolest parts of the whole experience of the Fighters Guild. Now this brings us to Banish the Wicked. This is just going to cause a gain of 7 ultimate when killing Undead or Daedra. Again, this one is just very bland and too focused on the Undead and Daedra things for my liking. Not really a fan of that. And then we finally get Slayer. This is going to deal 5% additional damage to Undead and Daedra. Now, as I said throughout, it's just too focused. And I have to say right away that Paladin is the first thing that came to mind here. It definitely reminded me of Paladin from WoW, with an overwhelming amount of plus damage or plus effects versus Undead. Now, I'm not really a fan of the overly niche skills. I'm just not a fan of that. I mean, the story is really driving this skill line, and I suppose Zenimax is probably just of the same thought that I am when I look at this, is that we have a lot of skills in the game already. They're already implemented with a lot of different variations and a lot of different skills available to the players. What's one very focused skill line gonna do? Is it actually going to impede on the skill line system we have? And I don't think it will, actually. I think that going with the Fighters Guild skill line, there are some skills which could be used outside of fighting Undead and Daedra. In addition to this, as I said, because of the overarching story for the initial release of Elder Scrolls Online, obviously this could change as we go forward. I hope we don't fight Undead and Daedra with expansions and patches and stuff just forever and always. But the fact is that this means in this initial release, odds are this is going to be pretty strong. So people are probably going to go for it for that. You have the draw from the Bounty Hunter thing, which I'm kind of up in the air about how it's going to be implemented. My brain is telling me that we're not going to get bounty quests the way I want, where it could actually put a bounty on another player, mainly because Zenimax said previously that they don't want the bounty system in the game yet, that they were thinking about maybe tying that to the thievery and the justice system, as it were. So I'm thinking we will probably get that to fighting NPCs. It'll be more of just Fighters Guild extra quests in Cyrodiil. Now, besides these things, I have to say that between the niche thing here and the actual guild quests, I think this is going to be a real draw for the people who want to have the kind of typical Elder Scrolls experience. I think people aren't going to mind the overly niche abilities here. In fact, I feel like a lot of people that are wanting the solo experience in the MMO setting are probably going to really enjoy the Fighter's Guild, because it seems like it has a very nice story going for it, and it will actually allow you to feel like the hero because you have all of these super powerful spells when fighting the undead. And as I said previously, there are some uses for these skills outside of this skill line, so I guess it would appeal to those players that maybe aren't interested in the actual storyline. An example that came to mind instantly was Circle of Protection could fairly easily be integrated to a healing build for some extra support and damage reduction. So there is some hybrid usage here. It's not so focused and so linear that you can't dissect this a little bit. So I suppose it gets by fine for me. But that brings us to the Mages Guild, which is the exact opposite. I can say right off the bat that this is nothing like the incredibly story-focused Fighters Guild. It is absolutely not that at all. But we'll just get right into it, and you'll see that it is complete opposite from what we just went over with the Fighters Guild. Now, the Mages Guild. The ultimate ability for the Mages Guild is called Meteor, which has a nice range. It's going to deal a nice chunk of fire damage. It's going to deal 50% extra damage to enemies that are closer to the center of where this lands, so within 5 meters it says. So it's going to have a nice radius on the explosion when the meteor hits the ground, and the closer the mob is to the center of that, the more damage it's going to do. And then this is also going to knock enemies back from the center of the attack, so launching them outwards as well. I'm a sucker for the meteor, to be honest. It sounds awesome. It's not like super powerful, it's not OP, not like some of the class skills that I were saying previously, just seemed really strong. This seems pretty cool. The cost isn't like overly significant or anything either, so I feel like this is a pretty cool skill. You'll probably see a good number of people at least trying out just for shits and grins, because that sounds awesome. Now that brings us to the active abilities, the first of which is Mage Light, which is going to summon a light for about 15 seconds, and the light is going to reveal hidden and invisible enemies within 12 meters or so. Now, obviously, this isn't the Mage Light that everyone was wanting if you played a previous Elder Scrolls game, right? This is not quite what we were wanting. They didn't want this sort of relegated to counter to stealth enemies, as it were. I mean, it's fine, it fits that niche because there's not a lot of skills that actually do that, but I'm sure I'm not the only one that was really hoping Zenimax would do something crazy and make some dungeons very dark and dingy, and maybe they could have still had the hidden and invisible enemies thing, but made it so that the light was actually useful in terms of visuals. You actually needed it to see. Now, that was obviously like way off in left field and not something we should have expected, but it would have been nice to see, I suppose. Now that brings us to Soul Trap. This is just going to deal a very small amount of magic damage over a couple seconds, and this is going to fill a soul gem if the enemy dies while affected. Now, this is interesting because we've seen a couple other spells talk about this, and I actually know some stuff that I can't talk about, but this, it makes the soul gem thing a little bit more understandable what they're going for here. But the idea of soul gems is that's how you can revive yourself and other players. That's really all I can say about it. The soul gem thing is, this is just going to be some extra utility when it comes to revival. That's really all there is to Soul Trap. Now that brings us to Equilibrium. This is going to trade 19 health for 19 magicka. The numbers are irrelevant, as I was saying, but the fact is you just trade an even amount of health for even magicka. This is very Warlock-ish. It reminds me of that from WoW, where you just trade health for magic. That's pretty cool, actually. I think that would fit well with some of the sorcerer spells in particular. Really reminds me of that. If you wanted to play the very dark Warlock-esque kind of character, Equilibrium is the spell for you. And that brings us to Fire Rune, which is, as you would expect, going to create a fire rune at a target location of your choosing within its pretty long range for about 30 seconds. And then when an enemy enters the area of the fire rune, it's just going to pop and deal some magic damage to the target that triggered it. Now, I would also hope that there's some AoE on this so that it has a little bit more utility to it. You could use it in a good more number of situations if there's some AoE, but it pretty much does what you would expect considering what runes do in the Elder Scrolls universe. And then that brings us to the final active ability, which is called Steadfast Ward. This is going to absorb a nice chunk of damage from the next incoming attack, and then it's going to last about 30 seconds. So you can pop this as a way to prevent a forthcoming very heavy attack. So if you know that there's a portion of a fight which is going to do significant burst damage to you, you can use this to counteract the one blow that does all of the damage if that's the kind of attack it is. That's a pretty strong kind of defensive ability that you can use. Excuse me there. And then that brings us to the passives. The passives for the Mage's skill line, Mage Guild skill line rather, starts with Persuasive Will. Allows you to persuade certain NPCs in conversation. Now, unlike the Fighters Guild, which was Intimidate, this is more a Persuade. So obviously the Mage's Guild is more of the scholarly route, as it were. Again, these seem to be guild-only kind of skills, so it's pretty cool to see them in the game because it does, again, add some immersion factor there. It makes you feel like you're actually contributing to the story because your conversation may be different than someone else's. Now, the next one is called Potency. This is going to increase spell damage and healing by about 5%. That's a very bland but incredibly potent. As I mentioned before, the percentages in MMOs are almost always really, really powerful. So for every 1% or so, that is significant. And for it to be a nice chunk like 5, that's really powerful. And I suppose it's fit for the name called Potency. It's definitely potent, that is for sure. We have Greater Ward following, which is going to reduce incoming spell damage by about 15% while blocking. So this is going to kind of be their way of imitating what you do if you had a ward in the normal test games. So you can put this up to block. So instead, Greater Ward is going to cause your blocking to actually have this extra effective blocking magic for extra damage reduction. I'm curious if they've gone the extra mile here and added, if you have these ward passives and you use the block, are you actually going to get a different sort of particle effect, as it were? Like, will you see a spell effect over your weapon when you're blocking? I don't know if I can expect that, but that would be really cool. That would really add to the immersion and just show that they are indeed going that extra mile. Then we have Stability, which is the final passive for the Mage's Guild, and this is going to increase Mage's Guild spell durations by about 20%. So it's not really clear how best this is going to work, but from what I can tell, it's going to increase the trap duration on your fire rune, so it will last longer than 30 seconds. Your Steadfast Ward is going to last for more than 30 seconds, but potentially as well is the ultimate ability, Meteor. It has fire damage attacks, so potentially there is fire going on in the area. It doesn't say there's lingering flame, but it's something that I wouldn't be too surprised to see. In addition, it's also going to increase the duration of Mage Light, so this is a pretty nice passive if you like the Mage's Guild skills enough to use more than one of them. Otherwise, it's a kind of whatever passive. Now, I have to say, when we were going over the Sorcerer, and I don't know if you guys remember, but when we were going over the Sorcerer, I really came across, and it seemed to me like there was a split of the classes, or a jumbling of the classes going through, where it seemed like on the Sorcerer, some of the skills were kind of lost, or it seemed like maybe they were trying to jumble two classes into one, and then there was like maybe supposed to be another skill line or another class entirely, and I was wondering, like, where did these other skills go, because I kind of expected them, and here they are. The Mage's Guild skills seem to really just be this extra weird mixed up set of skills that have come from maybe where their sorcerer ideas came from. They were like, well, we want to put all these skills on like a sorcerer class or something. Where in the world do we put it? We've just run out of room. And they decided, well, we're going to use a guild system, right, that gives you skills. So let's not put it in the Mages Guild. It just seems fitting. I mean, it is magic, so it fits the theme. And you can give these extra skills that maybe were themed towards like a sorcerer or a warlock play style. And then here they are. You can get them through the guild systems. That's pretty cool. It doesn't hurt that, as I said earlier, I am an absolute sucker for Meteor. It sounds awesome. It sounds brutal. And I mean, come on, guys. Who wouldn't want to use the black materia, as it were, and summon down a big-ass meteor to crush your enemies? That just sounds awesome. If you don't like meteors crushing your enemies, I'm not sure if you're human or not. Are you a raccoon? Do raccoons like meteors? I'm not sure. Maybe not. But you know what? I realize black materia, completely wrong universe, but don't ruin this for me. I want to summon a meteor, and I think you guys should learn to love meteors too. But let's get back on track. As I mentioned earlier, Mage Light is pretty interesting because there's no anti-sneak or stealth abilities, but sadly, yet again, it's not what everyone would have wanted. It's definitely not the Mage Light that we would have absolutely enjoyed the most. It's just the MMO version. It's not the requirement of Mage Light or similar sources of light being used in a dungeon or a dark hallway or a dark cave or what have you. But you know what? This is what we should have expected from the mention of Mage Light. Now, finally, I need to mention how powerful these skills are. This skill line is really powerful. Like, even though it is a smorgasbord of sorts with just crazy number of skills that it's not really a like really hard theme going on here. It's just if it's magic, it fits. That's really the theme for the guild. The passives on this alone are enough to allure someone to play the game and go to get the Mages Guild skills because they are really powerful. As I said, with potency, 5% is astronomical. That alone is huge. The spell duration on stability, if you're using some Mages Guild spells, are really powerful. And then you have the damage reduction with Steadfast Ward. You have the Meteor spell alone seems like it's probably powerful. Overall, I think this guild is powerful enough that it wouldn't surprise me. Now, it's not so powerful I can guarantee it like I have in the past, but I would not be surprised in the slightest if you play a sorcerer or a healer, or you play anything that really utilizes spell damage as your real focused DPS style, right? If you are any of those, it would not surprise me in the slightest if you are trying to do hardcore content that your guild and your guild master or whatever are all like, you have to go do the Mages Guild skill line. Go get those skills, they're super powerful. Otherwise, you are not at your top potential, yada yada yada, all that garbage that comes along with that. But it would not surprise me in the slightest if people were kind of forced into getting the Mages Guild skills, because these look really powerful. But you know what, guys, that is going to do it for me on this episode of Delving Deep ESO. Please make sure to thumbs up and comment down below on anything discussed today, anything about Elder Scrolls Online or MMO, or anything gaming in general, really. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already subscribed to Nova Pulse Gaming. That way you can get tons more MMO coverage from me. Thanks so much for watching again, guys, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.